evening, and so very happy to welcome Professor Feenberg to our Creative Theory Forum. And we were so much looking forward um, to his presentation during our September colloquium. And so you couldn't come, but today we are very fortunate that you are here, and we're all quite prepared to listen to you, talk to you, discuss the issue of technology, which is such a complicated thing for a lot of researchers. And you seem to be having some answers. Those answers are fascinating for us, and I'm sure you'll be able to uh, put it across here. Just a formal introduction, because a lot of other people will also be listening to you. So Professor Feenberg, the very well-known, established philosopher, social theorist of a critical school, a Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. And the introduction, you go to the internet and you type his name and you'll get the entire history of his writings and his life and his activism, his theoretical accomplishments, and so on and so forth. Today, I just want to mention that because this particular discussion is based on his writings on technology, I am going to mention some of the books that might be useful to our students and our young scholars on technology that he has written. His first book, Lukács, Marx, and the Sources of Critical Theory, is like a standard book that one must have if you want to be introduced to his writings and his thoughts and his thinking. Then his Critical Theory of Technology, which has come out from Oxford University Press in 1991. Alternative Modernity. I am particularly very much interested in this text because I work on modernity, which was published by University of California Press, 1995. Questioning Technology, Routledge, 1999. Transforming Technology, A Critical Theory, revisited, Oxford University Press, 2002. Heidegger and Marcuse. This is also a very interesting book. I managed to read some arguments from this book, and anybody wanting to understand the processes through which his theoretical journey goes and comes with an original position, this book is also very important. Then Between Reason and Experience, Essays in Technology and Modernity, MIT Press, 2010. Philosophy of Praxis, Marx, Lukács, and the Frankfurt School. Again, very important to understand the background in which he's placed and his thinking is placed. Technosystem, I am very thankful to Professor Lamas, who sent me some links to the review of this particular book, and I learned quite a bit from it. And The Ruthless Critique of Everything Existing obviously shows Professor Feenberg's background in critical thinking. Some of the one or two quotations I want to cite over here for our younger scholars to just get a kind of a preview of what he has been doing and while he's been thinking on technology, the kinds of things that he's been saying and things others have said by way of reflecting on his work. There's one quotation which might interest our viewers, is that it mentions that he is a pioneer in the philosophy of technology. Feenberg demonstrates the continuing vitality of the critical theory of the Frankfurt School. He calls into question the anti-technological stance commonly associated with its legacy and argues that technology contains potentialities that could be developed as the basis for an alternative form of modern society. He contests the prevalent conception of technology as an unstoppable force, responsive only to its own internal dynamics, and politicizes the discussion of its social and cultural construction. In his new collection of essays, Andrew Feenberg argues that conflicts over the design and organization of technological systems that structure our society shape deep choices for the future. So very much looking forward to how Professor Feenberg reconciles views of technology which are seen as instrumental in nature, uh, based on instrumental rationality, and a future society which will be a kind of a liberated society based on other potentialities of human life like our erotic drives, our um, moral, ethical potentialities that we have as human beings, even though it's very difficult now to argue about them in any essentialist manner. He takes care of that also. So, Professor Feenberg, in the great moment, historical moment of contradiction that we are faced as human beings, what do you think of technology? How is it meaningful to us? And what kind of future you foresee with your understanding of technology?
Well, I have a series of slides, but I don't know exactly how to make them show.
I
Let
will
me.
make you co-host and you can show it. Just let me make you co-host.
Okay.
Now you can do the slideshow.
Okay. Let me make sure I've got the right one here.
Share, the share, down green button.
Now, how do I do it?
In the bottom, you see a green button with an arrow.
Professor Lamas, can you help if Manind makes you a co-host as well?
He
You
can
could
do it.
send the slides to me by email.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Share. I can use share.
If you
Yes.
see share, hit that, and then your
Okay.
screen should pop up.
Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Now,
Excellent.
That's
Great.
it.
Yeah. You're there.
so that's now we're set, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now you can go on.
Okay. So this is a talk.
Slideshow icon so that the entire screen can be covered. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You can hit the slideshow icon on the bar.
I'm sorry, I don't see a slideshow icon.
Okay.
I don't know where it is.
You may continue from there also, don't worry. I think you just go on changing your slide. You can do it if you like.
I think I'll stick with this before I get in trouble.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a talk that presents my theories about technology. I call my approach critical constructivism, and so this is an overview of critical constructivism. So, philosophy of technology is doesn't really begin with us. It starts with the Enlightenment. Bacon said knowledge is power. Descartes, the French philosopher, said that we will become masters and possessors of nature. That's a quote. In the 19th century, two different approaches appeared. A optimistic approach. Marxism was the most significant of those, and romantic critiques of technology that were positively negative as far as technology is concerned. Looking back to the Middle Ages, for example, as a better solution. In the 20th century, the trend tends toward dystopianism. It's not exactly the same as the romantic critiques. It's much worse. You have ideas of a complete destruction of humanity, of humanity by technology. The Brave New World is a famous example. This is Aldous Huxley's book, in which the human race is essentially turned into a kind of mechanical system. And Heidegger, of course, presents us in philosophy with a dystopian view of technology as well. After World War II, there's a moment in which modernization theories appear in the United States as a kind of alternative to the Marxist ideas that are developed in Russia. And so there is a return of positive views about technology, but in the end, I think the dystopianism tends to take the stage. So here's a chart which shows the different types of theories of technology. You can see at the top, technology is autonomous or humanly controlled, and on the side, it's either neutral or value laden. And so the different theories that prevailed in the earlier, in my earlier slide, are here developed. Determinism includes modernization theory and the notion that technology is developing neutrally from toward a future which we cannot control. And when we think then of neutrality of technology in instrumental terms, sort of liberal faith in progress, we have the idea that we can direct technological development. And then here are the dystopian view, the substantive theory of technology, according to which what we do with technology determines us. Our lives are determined by the values that are embodied in the technology. And then here's the position that I occupy, in which I guess now many people occupy, the notion that we can make some sense of our technological world by deciding what kinds of technologies, what kinds of organization of technology we wish to have. So it's not exactly like instrumentalism. It's human. There's human control over technology, but it's not so simple, because each technological arrangement that we make has values associated with it. So the technology is not just instrumental, it has values, but we can make choices between different technical arrangements with different values. So here's some questions. Is technology, we know technology is rational in the normal sense of the term, but to what extent is it truly value laden? How is that possible? How can something rational also be value laden? That's a puzzle. Critical theory, or my constructivist approach to critical theory, does not reject rationality. What we reject is the idea of technical neutrality. So we've got to then come up with a way of thinking about how values and technical rationality can coexist. Langdon Winter wrote a famous article in the 1980s called "Do Artifacts Have Politics?" And it seemed like a puzzle. How could artifacts have politics? We know that politics is something people do in the parliament, they talk about it at the dinner table. But how could physical artifacts be political? So he argued that artifacts do have politics, and he gave an example, which you can see here. This is the Southern State Parkway created by Robert Moses in 1927. The idea of the parkway was to make it easier for people in New York to get to Jones Beach. And the parkway had these bridges over it because necessarily people were going to be traveling over the local roads as they went to Jones Beach. I mean, the locals would go over the local roads while the New Yorkers were going to Jones Beach. And if you look at the bridge, you can see that it's quite low. And one theory about this bridge and the number of bridges of its type is that it was designed to make it impossible for buses to reach Jones Beach. This would mean that ordinary people, because this is, remember, a long time ago when only rich people had cars, this would mean that ordinary people would not be able to reach Jones Beach. Only the wealthy would be able to get there by the convenient route created by Robert Moses. The others could get there perhaps, but slowly and with difficulty. So you could argue, as Langdon Winter did, that this bridge is actually designed to embody a value, the values of wealthy people, and to exclude poor people and Black people from accessing the beach. So here's an example of an artifact that has politics. This bridge is political. So let's think about the design of technology, because technology is designed. It's unlike natural objects. It isn't just there. You've got to make it, and you've got to do things that are specific to its configuration, to its purpose. There is a concept in philosophy of science called underdetermination, which helps us to think about the design of technology. Underdetermination means that in science means that theory, maybe it's a good theory, but there could be other alternatives that might be just as good or even better, who knows? Underdetermination suggests then that you can have a rational concept, a theory that makes sense in rational terms, but it isn't the only one. There could be others that might do the same job. And this notion in philosophy of science can be applied to technology. Technologies are similarly always more than technical, because you could always try a different construction, a different way of doing it, a different design with different value consequences. So you have to look, when you talk about technology, you can't just look at the physical objects there. You have to also look at the context, because that it's in that context that you can see how values have been embodied in the technology. Design, in other words, corresponds to a specific social world, a world that the designer is attempting to create. So I had this thought about the keyboards. What would computers look like had they been created for the first time in China or Japan? And I think the answer is they would be very different, because nobody in those countries would think it sensible to operate a keyboard for input. The inputs would have to come in some other way that made sense in a culture with a different, without an alphabet such as ours. So, for example, keyboard, instead of a keyboard, you might have had vocal inputs, or graphic inputs. There's a good example of this in Japan with the oh, I'm sorry, I'm missing a word here. Doesn't matter. In any case, you can see how culture is effective in determining what kind of design people would make. Okay, so I call this the bias of technology. Designs are inherently biased. There are no neutral technologies. There's always an element of underdetermination. You could always have done it differently with different social consequences. Technologies are normally adapted to an environment of some sort, and this introduces a bias from that environment, that is, say, from the society in which the technology is placed. I make a distinction between what I call substantive and formal bias. We normally think of bias in substantive terms as, for example, a prejudice of some sort against a certain group. Let me close the door. So this is the normal concept of bias, and I'm trying to introduce another concept to talk about technology. So substantive bias is substantive in the sense that it is based on some false fact by which people represent a group that they don't like. You can say, for example, that women are not intelligent. Only men are intelligent. That's substantive bias. That used to be very commonplace. We now no longer believe that, but I'm sure there's still some people who think it's true. So this is substantive because it has a substantive character. It involves a fact. In this case, a false fact. But when we talk about technology, there's obviously nothing of the sort. There's no false fact involved in the bias of technology. So I call this a formal bias. It's a bias that doesn't result from a false fact, but rather from a design. And the design itself implements the bias. So formal bias is, unlike substantive bias, which is based on falsity, formal bias is not incompatible with rationality. It's a particular way of being rational. So I have an example here that makes it clear. I found this on the internet. It's a store that's there to help people who are left-handed. Now, people who are left-handed have trouble with scissors because scissors are generally designed with the idea that the thumb goes in one way, or developed scissors that work just as well for left-handed people. So this is an example of a formal bias. It has nothing to do with false facts. It's purely a question of design. And it gives you an idea of how to think about formal bias. So this, I think of this in terms of double aspects. Technology has double aspects. On the one hand, it's technical. On the other hand, it's cultural. On the one hand, you can see it as offering various affordances, the things you can do with it. And on the other hand, it fits into a life world and has consequences in that life world. Now, affordance is a property of an object that determines how that object can be used. And these affordances can be physical or they can be perceived properties of objects. I mean, a rock has an affordance in terms of using it to break something. Mostly we think of affordances, though, in relation to technology as the designs that were created in order to make us be able to do something. The life world is what we experience. It's meaningful and social. It's a shared universe of concepts, of objects and actions that environs us. So we're now going to argue that technology has both these aspects, the affordances and the life world context. So if we think of affordances as technical elements, they're elements, they're the elements of the design. You could think of this as analogous to words and sentences. The affordances give us a code with which to understand the formation of the technology. Technical insight enters technology encoded. It's always encoded in terms of some cultural environment. But culture is so obvious it's overlooked. What we see when we see a technology is that it does X for us. It's useful, it has affordances. And what we tend to overlook is the cultural environment that has shaped it. Here's an example of what I call a technical code, as to say the double aspect that operates at both levels, both the level of affordances and the level of culture. This is a mill, a cotton mill in South Carolina in the 1920s. And you can see this little girl is operating the equipment, and the equipment seems to have been adjusted to her height. So she can handle the equipment. So obviously, I mean, assuming that this is a good example, and you could always create other examples, it seems that when the design of the mill was constructed, the designers thought that it would be operated by very small people. And so they made the size of the thing to the height of these small children who were going to operate the mill. What happens, I mean, this seems obvious, but of course it depends on a social phenomenon, the idea of child labor, which of course disappears at a certain point, and then the design has to be redone for people who are taller. So you can see here, it looks, I mean, from the standpoint of it's perfect, but from the standpoint of culture, you can see that is contingent on a social phenomenon, the phenomenon of child labor. So the technical code then, the technical code of the mill, of the cotton mill, takes into account both the affordances and the cultural phenomena. That's why, and so it is it's both social and technical. So we can think about technical codes in terms of the programs of the actors who design technology. The actors, here we're talking really, there's an element of Bruno Latour's theory here. The actors are the social groups that influence design. They have the power to decide which way things go, to bias the design. And they have programs, and the programs are their plans or tendencies, the things that they want to accomplish. The programs join people and things in networks. They enter the network, people enter the network simplified as operators of the technology or users of the technology. And associations bring them all together. Oh, I'm getting lost here. So the associations between the technologies and the users bring the network of the technology together in a system that is both causal and symbolic. It's causal because technology does things causally, and symbolic because it also has some relationship to a cultural environment. So Latour mentioned at one point something he calls an anti-program. And I like this idea, although I don't follow Latour all the way. This idea seemed to me really interesting. The anti-program is what happens when the simplifications that make a technology operate break down. So you have a roof, and rust on the roof causes rain to get in. It's an anti-program of the rain, according to Latour. Anti-programs are constantly involved in involving us in problems because our technologies break down in one way or another, and other things get involved. Termites get into the wood of the house. The anti-program is operated by the termites against our program, which is to have a nice wooden house. So according to Latour, technologies have to be understood in terms of simplifications, and when the simplifications fail, then the anti-program takes over. So I don't really follow the idea of termites as a program, having a program, but we can still use the notion of anti-programs to talk about how technologies break down. New associations emerge in the network of technology. Different meanings appear. We can think about this in terms of the the relationship between the network within which the technology exists and the system that is created by the users. Let me see if I can make this clearer. Consider a factory. The factory is a network of technologies, and these are used by all the members of the factory, and also the technologies have consequences for the people who live nearby. So the network extends beyond the factory to the all its causal consequences. For example, smoke bothers people in the neighborhood from the chimney. So then is something that simply the causal consequences of technology, both intended and unintended. The system, we can say, is simply those intended consequences that are created by, for example, the factory owners see the network in terms of the system of consequences that interest them. They're not interested in the smoke that gets into the neighborhood. Their system is built around what they intend by developing the network. Workers could also have a system which would be different from that of the factory owners. They could, for example, be demanding more wages, and this could be a problem for the designers of the system. The neighbors could get a lawyer to get them to a judge to criticize the factory for putting smoke in there out of the chimney. So you could have another system, a system created by the neighborhood, which would have different demands and different concerns from the original system of the owners. So all of these systems would be part of the vast network created by the technology. So this notion of systems and networks has democratic implications. Technology has emerged in the last few centuries out of the capitalist system, created by people with the power to design the technology in order to achieve their ends. This is the capitalist heritage that we enjoy. But the capitalist heritage includes certain values and excludes others. There's a great reluctance on the part of this capitalist heritage to worry about climate change, for example. For a long time, workers had very few rights and were exploited mercilessly because that was what was part of the capitalist system at the time. I guess it still is in many countries. So this particular, so we can think of the effect of the bias of technology and the consequences for society as related to the vast development of capitalism over the last few centuries. Certain values are expressed and others are excluded. Today we see, especially in the wealthy countries, considerable resistance against many of the values that capitalism represents. These values you could think of as the facts of the future. They're not just they're not just sorry, I have a cold. They're not just values in the sense in which philosophers talk about values. These are actual dimensions of the future development of the society. Okay, so here's some of the books that I've written that you could look up, and you can contact me through my email. So I've given you now some starting points for discussion. Let's see, how do I'm not sure how to.
Manindra, can you please instruct?
I guess I can't get all of you visible.
Yeah, we can. Just a second. Manindra, can you please? Hello?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Manindra?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to remove him as co-host. That will.
Yes.
Maybe if I'm no longer co-host,
Yeah.
everyone can show.
Just give a minute. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So that was an attempt to present the theory. You have some comments you want to make?
Certainly. If you have nothing more to say about it, or you want to sort of give a kind of a summary of what you said, because actually your writings are deeply philosophical. Say, for example, let me just quote a sentence from your article, Ethics and Technology, where you say that technology is an ontological principle, that technology must be oriented towards perfecting rather than dominating its object. In your I want to make another put another statement in from your book Transforming Technology. Say what human beings are and will become is decided in the shape of our tools, no less than the action of statesmen and political movements. The design of technology is thus an ontological decision fraught with political consequences. The exclusion of the vast majority from participation in this decision is profoundly undemocratic. Underlying all these arguments is that we are the ones who make technology, we are the ones who make ourselves, we are the ones who make our societies. And so we inherently have this option or a choice to make it differently. And making differently, this conviction comes from a critical understanding of rationality, of society, of our conventions, of our understanding of essences, and so on and so forth. On the basis of this kind of philosophical reading that I'm presenting on your behalf, I would like you to make a small comment, then I'll open the floor for questioning. Particularly, two people are going to ask questions. Manindranath Thakur, who is a creative theorist like me, and who is one of the founder members of the Foundation of Creative Theory and Social Research. And then there's going to be Saurabh, who works on Heidegger and who has worked Heidegger technology, has a PhD from JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he now teaches He's a phenomenologist, by the way. You perhaps like him much. And he's an associate professor. People who are going to ask many questions. They have gathered questions from other people who wanted to interact with you, and they have their own questions. I have my own questions, which I will ask much later. We have two more people, Professor Andrew T. Lamas. We would be very happy if he asks questions. And our new friend, Usha Rana, who has just joined my School of Gender and Development Studies. She's also joined today. If she has any questions, she can ask you if you would be willing to answer. So another 30 to 40 minutes, maybe we will just interact. All right.
Okay.
So I would say that given the fact that Professor Feenberg's understanding of technology is one of openness, in a way, it invites us to understand it differently and show that the game of technology is not forever taken over by those who are powerful, those who have got technical skills, and those who own the means of production, those who set the logic of production, and so on and so forth. There are possibilities for other cultures, other people to also contribute to the emergence of a technological society, which will also be democratic. So, Manindra, would you like to ask some questions first?
Yeah, thank you very much, Savita, and thank you, Professor Feenberg, for giving an overview of your perspective, constructivist perspective on technology. We are struggling to understand and develop a perspective on it of our own, given our own cultural context, and where we experienced modern technology very differently. We experienced it through colonial power. So technology came to us to dominate us. So as a consequence, one of the perspectives that developed at the time, and in which Gandhi played a very important role, who was not anti-technologist, but who was very skeptical to technology. So the question that he raised was, what is socially relevant technology? And how do we make choices to socially relevant technology? Do we have choices? Can we make choices? And if we do, then what could be the criteria of defining socially relevant technology? And something that you have been talking about, the value system, and that has to be very carefully designed to handle technology. So his perspective was that the first thing that we, particularly India, has enough labor power. So we should select a technology which does not remove human beings from work. Instead, it can enhance productivity, but keep human beings involved in that. And that is also a question of not only production, but also of distribution. The second criteria he thought was that if you want to create a non-alienated society, then working is very important. Work itself is very important. So a technology that can allow us to work, keep us involved in the process of creative engagement with the production process, that is very important. And third, a technology that does not allow accumulation of wealth in some hands. Now, if we use these three criteria to select a technology, then how do you think the modern technology will fit into this criteria? So Gandhi has been criticized by many people, by his own disciple, Nehru, as somebody against technology. But I think Gandhi was very careful about technology and its role in society. So how do you look at that? How do we make a choice in such a situation where you have enough manpower and they need to be involved in production process, both for distribution and for being non-alienated. How do you think we can make that choice? What kind of values can be incorporated in the mainstream technology system?
Well, it's a bit late. Gandhi had ideas that might have guided the development of Indian society in the 1950s and 60s, but those ideas were not implemented. Instead, modernization took over according to the ideas of the US and Russia. And India developed into a normal country by the standards of modernization as it has developed in the West. So I don't think it's that easy now to get back to what Gandhi was talking about. The development of huge industrial complexes is not exactly what he was asking for. And that's exactly what Nehru and people around him thought would save India. So the result is a very different world from the one Gandhi imagined. But I don't know how you could find in what Gandhi's ideas represented something that could enter into the world that Nehru created. Isn't that the problem, right? That you'd like to somehow Gandhi represented a different set of values and a different type of technology from the one that has been created in India. And perhaps there's some way in which those values and technologies could enter into the world that was created by Nehru, but it's not so easy. I mean, I don't know enough about India, but I assume there are very large numbers of millions and millions of people who live in small villages and who grow food. So there's still a large part of India that is not modern system that you find in the big cities. And perhaps in those, in that part of India, there'd be a way of introducing different values and different technologies rather than simply treating them as backward. And so I know that in Brazil, and I know there's been some interaction between agricultural people in Brazil and India. There are attempts to develop agroecology, and in other words, instead of the giant mechanized farms that the US and Russia offered to India, instead build around the work of small farmers and help them to devise more effective ways of using the land. And so perhaps there'd be some way in which you could build a kind of, because India is so huge and so many different, there's so many different possibilities in there, maybe it would be possible to make something out of Gandhi's ideas in in Indian agriculture.
May I just
Yes.
continue with this? I think one would like to suggest that the kind of modernization that has happened in India, that is now throwing new questions. And therefore, there is a contemplation going on among many thinkers in India, like Vandana Shiva and Ashish Nandi and many more, that probably, not only for India, for humanity as a whole, one has to go back to those three criteria that Gandhi thought of for selecting a technology for humanity. These are not very specific to Gandhi or to India or to relatively backward society. Maybe humanity will have to use those criteria to rethink about socially relevant technology. Otherwise, the use of pesticide and the pollution that is being produced, the alienated urban life that we are having, all these are very universal to everyone. So do you think any possibility of incorporating those ideas at a universal level, not only for remote villages where probably the modernity has not reached, may not be in near future, maybe this is the one thing that has to be incorporated philosophically in the discourse of philosophy of technology?
Well, what's the technical world that we live in is a capitalist world. And capitalism has its criteria, and they don't fit with Gandhi's. And so what we face is it's not as though there was some way we could simply reorganize the world around Gandhi's criteria. What we face are conflicts with capitalism by ordinary people who have other ideas about how the world should look. For example, around pollution or climate change. And it's not unlikely that that ideas like those of Gandhi would play a role in these attempts to resist the way in which capitalism has organized society and technology. But it's a different, it's really about conflict. It's about conflict over how to reshape the modern sectors of the society, which are, of course, total in the case of the United States, say, or Europe, but still partial in countries like India or China. So I'm not sure. I guess I'd have to look again at your criteria to see what I think, how they fit with this notion of social struggle over technology, because that's in fact what we are dealing with. We don't have the opportunity that Gandhi thought might rise to create a technology based on directly on the ideas that he proposed. We do that now in the main sectors of technology because it's all been set up already by capitalism. And so we're in a different situation. We're not creating a new technical system. We're trying to modulate and in some cases transform an existing system. So I mean, there are consequences. How many people? Like 300 million people in Delhi? It's the size of a nation. So, and it has pollution problems that are catastrophic. So, well, you can't take those 300 people and put them somewhere else. I mean, stuck there. This is their lives. On the other hand, you could do something about the pollution. And so you get political movements, social movements, attempts to alter the environment. But it's a long way from there, getting back to the kind of world that Gandhi had hoped to create in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah. Should I come back again, Savita, or I can have
Yeah, maybe you can ask one or two questions, and then Professor Lamas, and then Usha, then I'll come myself.
Another question I want to ask is, in this constructivist idea of technology or philosophy of technology, how do you deal with the question of anthropocentric attitude? Well, is it that humans are thinking of technology only from the perspective of humans, and we don't think of from the perspective of other living beings? For instance, when we are using the windmills, a lot of birds are being killed there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we incorporate this question in our larger philosophy of technology?
I'm not really. Isn't there in India that tries to protect even the that? Yeah, these are truly fighting against anthropocentrism. But of course, it's not really a plausible solution for modern society. So I guess I'm not impressed by this idea that we should think in terms of an anthropocentric alternative, a non-anthropocentric alternative to our. Well, if we do the right things for us, it will have many others. So I think our first problem is to just get our own house in order. And for all the creatures on the earth. And perhaps, or in some particular cases, we might want to make a special concern for other groups. But I don't really think we're in any shape to deal with this. I mean, look, the climate change issue is real, and it will destroy civilization, quite simply. So we better deal with that. And if windmills are part of dealing with that, and birds die, then maybe we should think about how to help the birds not get involved with the windmills, rather than worrying too much about, it's just seems to me we've got bigger issues, huge issues, and where we can deal with issues, we try sometimes to protect a bird or some sort of animal, but these are minor. It's a minor aspect of what's going on. The main thing is, can we deal with the huge consequences of our technology? And that's our first problem. So I guess I'm not impressed by anthropocentric, the anti-anthropocentric arguments. They seem to me to be pretty much irrelevant, given the state of our situation today.
Sort of, do you have questions?
Yeah, may I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, Professor Feenberg.
Hi.
Yeah, so I would just like to pick up the question what Professor Manindra asked about the anthropocentry, but from a different perspective, from the Heideggerian perspective.
Mhm.
So in your work, you criticize Heidegger, and of course, you say that Heidegger gives a essential reading of technology when he says that technology is the inframing. It allows us to see the world in a particular way as a standing reserve. But on the one hand, Heidegger was also talking about this tradition of the being, that how we think of the human as in the openness of the being, when our relationship with the entities is not in the instrumental term, but more in the terms of the letting be, let the things be. So, which is, I think, in the history of the Western philosophy, a move away from the anthropocentrism in Heidegger. And second, which you also discuss in your work, like how do you see Heidegger's interesting notion of the free relationship with technology when he talks about the gathering, that technology also gathers the thing, so that he says the original meaning of the techne. So how do you see that in your reference to your work?
Okay, just a second, I have to do something. The problem I have with Heidegger, the main problem I have with Heidegger is that it's not that there's nothing like the inframing. He can talk about the inframing, and I can see the point. There is, in fact, a kind of overwhelming technical reality that he's trying to understand, but he doesn't seem to see the possibilities of. I mean, it's one thing to be inframed by the pollution in Delhi, and it's another thing to be inframed by a nice park in a city that has good control of its automobiles, right? I mean, there's a huge difference, and but by just calling it all inframing, you lose the possibility of having a theory of design, and that I think is a problem, because then what he talks about when he talks about a free relation to technology just seems like an indifference to technology, when in fact we shouldn't be indifferent to technology. We should be busy trying to make it better for us. And so this is my problem with Heidegger, is that he doesn't. I think this is also, I mean, you think about who he was and what kind of a world he was living in, and what is, I mean, this is a guy who probably could not make coffee. I mean, you know, he's a humanist intellectual. He doesn't have any real notion about how technology works, or this is a problem. So it all seems the same to him. He doesn't. This is, and it's a mistake. He sees it as much more rigid than it really is. In fact, the technology is it's a field which all kinds of possibilities are open. Now, all of them might be still in his view, part of the inframing, but they make a huge difference in the way people live. So I guess this is my difficulty with Heidegger. So it's not that he's completely wrong. Uh, it's that he's missed the complication of technology.
Yes. Yeah, so I agree with you, and I see the point that you say that different kind of the inframings, but according to Heidegger, that even the different inframings, and his main question was that there is the forgetfulness of the being. So he established himself in the history of the philosophy, and he says uh, that primarily that there is the forgetfulness of being. So the question of what you say that,
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said. There's a something
Slowly.
or other of being,
yeah, forgetfulness of being,
fullness of being.
Forgetful,
forgetfulness of being.
forgetfulness.
Oh, forgetfulness of being.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he said that the question of the technology that we remain busy with the what the use of the technology can do is it uh, it uh, it actually triggers the forgetfulness of the being. So he situates himself in that tradition. So how do you see the Heidegger's major question? Because his uh, his interaction with technology is mainly to the question of the being, how the memory of the being, how the design's essential relationship being can be restored. Is it like can we really criticize Heidegger on the ground that he doesn't talk about the technology in the way you have thought about?
Yeah. Um, you know, I guess I don't really know what to say. I think what, in a way, what's happened with Heidegger is that he's taken the fact of capitalist control of technology as he's turned that into a general idea of technology.
Mhm.
The, the it's certainly true that the capitalist organization of technology has limits and severe limits, and those limits you could call a forgetfulness of being,
Mhm.
but it's not necessarily uh, fatal in the way in which he thinks, because when people resist some of these limits of capitalism, is that not a way in which a, a something happens that goes beyond? Maybe you could call that a return to being, but I'm not sure how to think about it. But it's a different way of understanding technology when people engage with it in order to um, overcome those limits of capitalism. One way, I mean, it looks like uh, we want our health to be taken care of. Capitalism doesn't usually care much about that. It wants to make money. And if our health is um, our health gets damaged, so be it. So when people return and try and change the way the technologies are designed in order to protect their health, I don't think we can call this the same thing as what capitalism is doing when it ignores people's health. It's a different relationship to technology. Could this be, in fact, the sort of thing that Heidegger wanted but couldn't talk about, couldn't understand because he didn't have any understanding of technology? Um, I don't know. I mean, that's something to think about. Something is going on there which is different, and needs to be worked out philosophically. So to my mind, the problem that the big problem with Heidegger's approach is that he sees, of course, you can understand why, he sees Russia and the United States as as different forms of technology that are the same ultimately. You know, in the larger scheme of things, they are the same.
Yep.
And so therefore, there is no, and there's no, of course, at the time he was writing and developing his ideas, there was no environmental movement, there was no attempt to actually transform technology. It was simply what corporations did. Now we live in a different period in which there is very active intervention in technology for other, not just for profit, but for other concerns, human concerns. So we're in a somewhat different situation, and we don't think of technology in exactly the way Heidegger thought of it. And how to actually sort of understand what he was trying to do in our terms is not so easy. But maybe you can do it, you know, find a way of thinking about it that makes sense. I mean, I guess I think there's something in all these resistances of technology that ought to help us understand better what Heidegger was trying to get at, what he couldn't actually understand, he couldn't develop himself.
Then
Can I
those
ask?
yeah, all right, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead if you.
Yeah, because there's limited time. If you have
Yeah.
anything to say, if you have any more question that you think needs to be asked now,
I can ask later. I think
yeah,
we can. Yeah.
yes,
Have second round if needed. Yeah.
yes. So, Usha, do you have any question? Usha is a young feminist scholar who has
Here it
joined
seems.
School of Gender and Development Studies. If
I don't see.
I don't see her. Okay.
She's
All
not.
right. So, it's not. All right. So, Professor Lamas, you have anything to say?
Yes, thank you all. It's good to be here. Andrew, I was interested in what you were saying about anti-program. And I just wanted to follow that up in this particular way and please help me with this. I'm thinking that there is intentional anti-programming. We could think maybe of the concept of planned obsolescence. I would call it intentional anti-programming built into the program. So not just the termite example, but actually designed in the program is the anti-program. That would be type one. Type two of the anti-program would be necessary anti-program. In other words, the way in which all technology, because of its material basis, degrades. We could think about, film and floppy disk and even digital photographs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering, is it appropriate to think about the anti-program, which is external to the program? That would be the termite example or the rain example. Natural interventions from the outside. And then internal anti-programs, those which are intentionally part of the design. And then part two, those which are a result of the material basis of technology itself. Is that all a correct way of thinking, or incomplete, or problematic?
Well, Latour's idea, which he just briefly mentions in one text, is what inspired me. But then I sort of twisted it into my own purpose. I mean, you could talk about anti-programs in any way you wanted, really, because it's it's not a real thing. It's just, but but what I wanted to do with it was to just talk about the human element, the anti-programs that are created by human beings who confront technology but don't like the way it's designed and try and alter it. So my idea of the anti-program is really not exactly Latour's notion, which could, I guess, embody things like the termites and the obsolescence and so on. You could work it out in many different ways. But what interested me was the idea that the networks created by technology, which are, of course, not just what people want, but also all the causal implications that result from their activities. These networks produce contain systems, and these systems, which are intentional, are a fragment of the total network. And some of these systems are official. They're the official systems made by the people who designed the technology, who operate the systems, and so on. But then there are also the anti-systems of the people who are annoyed by the technology, who want to change the way it works, or who have problems with it. And so I thought this would be an interesting way of talking about how to the politics of technology. So
Right.
yeah. So
Okay,
I just have a very small fraction of Latour's idea.
no, that's helpful. So it's social and political intervention or critique, which is the
Yeah.
kind of anti-program. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea
Yeah.
is that you could think of resistance to technology in a sort of maybe in a more Heideggerian way, as on the outside, you're outside the technology, you don't like the way it works, you want to, but what I was thinking of was how, in fact, you aren't on the outside, you're part of the network created by the technology. So, so this is a way of making this conflicts around technology immanent to technology rather than external to it. That was the idea. Is that clear?
Yes, that's very helpful. Yeah.
So I think the discussion is going on pretty well. If you, Professor Feenberg, if you're willing to answer some more questions, I will ask my own. If you want to close it here, then we'll close it here.
No, that's okay. You have a question.
Yeah, I have many questions rather. First of all, let me tell you that I really appreciate the depth with the question of technology. So while reading you some of the things, I haven't read most of it, but whatever I've been reading, particularly in the context of this discussion, there is I particularly like when you go back to the Greeks and because it is this historical approach that you have to your understanding. So very clearly you show how what is the difference between a substantive understanding of rationality and an instrumental understanding of rationality. You make place for yourself within the critical theory, and you sort of take position against Heidegger, and also, your uh, other critical theorists like Adorno, and you see their limitations. And uh, obviously, because you studied with Marcuse, uh, and you also participated in um, movements of various kinds. So your view is not like, when you're saying that Heidegger did not understand technology. One of the reasons could be that he did not participate in any of the movements going on at that time. His understanding was not activated by the forms of reality that were at that time contradicting with each other and all that. So he couldn't see a lot of contradictions, but you can see, and you can also see limitations of very many great thinkers. When it comes to Marcuse, this is not an acquisition, but it's a it's a thing that I want to ask. Do you think that in a very creative manner you have uh, given an inner view of how technology develops in the Western part of the world? At the moment, I'm not even not entering into the Indian context, because there seem to be, and it's clear from your argument also earlier that you made, that technology is now technology. And in technology is technology. I mean, this the cultural differences and all that. It seems that it's an overriding logic of technology at the moment is capitalist in its telos, and it is run by that telos. So in this kind of a scenario, it's over dominating understanding of technology, which is basically aligned with the interest of the capitalist class. Do you think that your position is a bit utopian, just like Marcuse? You have active faith in a future which actually will be democratic or will satisfy human potentials of various kinds of things, like aesthetic aspirations and aspirations of happiness and unalienated life, uh, on the basis of an inner view that you give in terms of seeing some possibility of participating in its course through designing, through um, locating certain histories of progress in technology and understanding of science. So, because the overriding understanding at the moment is dystopian, there is a lot of concern about technology. Do you think your view is too optimistic? Not too optimistic, but at least optimistic. You think that it is possible to turn the tide at this point of time, when you yourself say that it is a bit late?
Well, now that Trump has succeeded in becoming president of the United States, I'm less optimistic. It does seem that it has always seemed to me that it was necessary that there be some kind of counterbalance to the way in which capitalism was organizing technology. And that counterbalance would come from social movements. The first example was the proletariat, right? The Marxist proletariat in the 19th century. That did not work out the way Marx expected, but there have been other kinds of putting some limits on a system which is inherently dangerous. So, okay. So I don't know what to say, because I'm not seeing the development of the social movements that I expected around climate change. There's very little going on, much less than I would have expected. Instead, what's happened is a tremendous concern with immigration. And this is just the opposite. It's like, you're living on the planet Earth and you think somehow that if you can keep people off your little piece of it, you're going to be okay. That's completely ridiculous. But that's what seems to work politically. So I still have the hope that when things get bad enough, people will react. But so far they haven't. In the United States, we had this example of tremendous hurricanes in Florida and North Carolina. This huge destruction. And those people still voted for Trump, who thinks that climate change is a hoax. So it's discouraging. I don't really know what to make of it. It seems likely that things will have to get much, much worse before there's any reaction. And that doesn't sound good because of there's no things will continue until it becomes really impossible for people to live. I don't know where this goes.
But why do you, sorry, may I just,
yes.
But why do you think that there's no strong movement against the imminent danger of climate change? Is it just because people are not aware of it, or the ruling class does not want that to happen, or you think there is a kind of political context in which people think that it is not so important?
Well, of course, the fact it has to do with time. It has to do with time and the way people understand time. Capitalism operates on a concept of time that is based on the interest rate. So what's important today is, well, I mean, if you're operating a business and you have to make decisions, it matters how long it takes for things to happen, because you have to concern yourself with the interest rate. So $1 today is worth $1 today, but how much is it worth in 10 years? Just use the interest rate and you'll find out. Maybe it's worth 60 cents. Because that's what, that's what the interest would cost for that. So, I mean, this side, everything is based on the value of money. Seems to have infiltrated the whole culture. So, normally in the past, I think that time is understandable, for example, through generations. You think about the value of the future in terms of what you owe the past. It's simple, right? You could think of it as ancestor worship. Right? You must take care of your children because your parents took care of you. And there's absolutely no question of an interest rate. Your kids are just as valuable in 50 years as they are today. So that would seem to be a basis on the basis of which human life could take care of itself over time, and that would then be a sort of a counter to the capitalist interest rate version of time. But that doesn't. It's as though ordinary people are not taking account of the fact that their children will grow up in a different world. It's like, a kind of a loss. It's a sort of fundamental stupidity that they ought to be all upset about the fact that their kids are going to be living in a world that they never want their kids to live in. But they don't seem to think about that because so this is what worries me. What if the culture has become so completely overwhelmed by the time of capitalism that it's unable to confront the future in a reasonable way? That could then what happens? Then the thing collapses.
I mean,
Then would you think that any plausible social movement for change will have to actually reclaim the notion of time?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very important.
Yeah, that is what it's all about. We have to demand a future based not on economics, but on human reproduction.
Yeah, and that's when I want to bring in feminism, Dr. Feenberg. What do you think the women's movement, women thinkers, writers have been very, very skeptical of how science has developed in the Western part of the world. And today, even Karen Merchant's book, Death of Nature, Vandana Shiva has been writing quite a bit about the destructive role of technology affecting basically the perpetuation of all life forms, not only human species, but all life forms are under severe threat. So what does then the future looks actually dystopian. I mean, this is what I wanted to understand, that in your position, there's a clear optimism when it comes to understanding technology, and when you think about democratizing technological spaces and through intervention through designs and all that and so forth. But the outcome, the social outcome of all this kind of a thinking, where is it taking us? Your understanding of technology, how is it defining a near future, not very long, but a near future for us?
I guess I'm not quite sure what it is I should say. I guess I got lost there with why is the near future part of the discussion of science and its problems?
It seems that we are not very far from a time where we will be clueless as to how to return to any other forms of society.
Oh, I think we're already way
So,
beyond.
I think,
Yeah.
Savita, I would just like to add, and I would like to impress upon this idea. I mean, I have to push this idea further, that probably existence of all life forms are interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
And as Vandana Shiva, you quoted Vandana Shiva, what she's saying, that other species, the life forms of other species, they are interrelated. If we think of existence of human beings only, probably we are falling in the same trap, and then we can't think of a paradigm shift from the dominant modernist capitalist notion of technology to something which could be much more democratic and liberative. So the point is that probably any alternative perspective, do you think any alternative perspective will have to work upon the time, the notion of time? And that notion of time should not only include the future of future generations of human beings, but also future of other species simultaneously. And if I accept your argument, then probably this is possible. But then the intervention in technology for democratizing technology will be much more intense and widespread.
I'm not sure I understand what's going on. This is what I think. I think we, as a species, we've lost the possibility of escaping from the world of technology. It's over. So the question is, can we live with technology? There's no escape, but can we live with it? And that means quite drastic changes in the way in which the social world is organized. We cannot, in my view, we cannot expect to survive with a capitalist system such as the one we have. It will destroy the planet for human beings. Be very good for lots of other species, but not for us. We don't know how to organize a different system. We haven't had any luck so far. You could look at the attempts that were made, for example, by the Eastern European countries that tried to make something of socialism that would work, but that was always crushed by the Russians. And then the Russians destroyed their own system and just turned into another batch of same kind of capitalism, that even worse than we have in the West. So we don't have the model. We know, this is my view, we know that we can't survive with the system we've got, and we don't have a model. So it's tricky, it's difficult, and maybe impossible. On the other hand, I do not believe that the problem is technology as such. I think it is the way in which, because we have the possibility of changing the technologies, of changing their designs, of living in different technological universes that are quite different, with very different consequences, both for people and for the environment, and for other animals. And so technology is not a destiny. It's not a destiny. It's a possibility, and we need to develop that possibility. But right now, the only real power in the world is the oil companies. So this is a difficult situation, and I don't know the answer. There are people who have speculated about different ways of organizing economics. Because of course, the problem is how we know it does work, so that's good. Food gets where it's needed, and people have shoes, and it more or less works. What would be an alternative? How could we get the same results without the damage that is consequent upon the capitalist system as we now enjoy it? And we don't have a clear view. There are people who have ideas. Those ideas could be tested, I guess, but we're not in a position to do that. All we can really do at this point is what I would call resistances. There are resistances to some of the worst features of capitalism. And those resistances seem to require a strong public action, demonstrations, political movements. So that's what we've got for the moment. That's all we've got. And if it became powerful enough, it might be able to move us in a new direction. Right now, we're just, we've had some results. The system is much, much less brutal and destructive than it was, say, in 1900. So it's not like the case is hopeless. It's just very difficult, and it seems like time is running out.
If there are no more questions, should we round up the whole thing?
Yes, and we can think of another round after some time.
Yes.
So if other people in your group want to ask me questions, we can,
Yes.
They can send emails to me. We can have a discussion by email.
Yes.
And that might be the best way, since your timing is so different from.
Yes.
The,
But I'm so very happy that you could make it. It doesn't matter because we work till late, so it's no strain as far as we are concerned. But we wanted to make sure that you come and meet us with happiness and in comfort, good timing and all that. And it has become possible today, for which we are very grateful and very happy.
okay, well, I'm glad we could do this.
Yes. So I want to thank you again formally, and thank you all my friends who have joined today. And I think we had a good discussion, honest discussion as to where we are placed and how to think about technology. In the second round of discussion, if we have at all, maybe after a month or so, we will discuss some very basic questions as to what is technology, what is the future of technology. These questions a lot of people ask. They want to know how you answer them. Of course, there are a number of answers, but how you answer them is what is important. So we will do it, we'll organize it again at some later point of time. But for today, thank you very much for joining us and having this discussion. This discussion is recorded. It will be shared with all the scholars who have been wanting to hear. And the last argument that you made, which was a realistic argument, that we are passing through a very difficult time. And technology or no technology, it seems that we are not going in the right direction, because there is just so much violence. At the moment, so much war is going on all over the globe. It's not really a good time to think anything in an optimistic manner. But I appreciate the optimism, theoretical, philosophical optimism that you have built into your system of understanding and thinking. So thank you so much again.
Very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are very keen to discuss future of technology of future and future of humanity. So
Okay.
that was the title
can
of
do-
our conference.
We can do this again if you
Yes.
wish.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be very happy to do it.
Thank
And
you.
Okay.
certainly we'll get in touch with you.
Thank you, Professor Feenberg.
Good night from
Bye.
Delhi.
Good night from here.
Bye.